Hello, TV and CT managers. This module is about thinking tools and the creative process and a little bit of project management. The first step is to get access to the roadmap. We are going to be using the roadmap in this module. So if you have it online or if you have the hard copy in front of you, that will be very useful. So why thinking tools? Thinking tools will help your team go from a humdrum presentation with the backdrop that is falling down to something that is more stable with depth and creative use of materials. The stages of the creative process. These are covered fairly thoroughly in the roadmap. They are recognize, imagine, initiate and collaborate, assess and evaluate and celebrate. This can be found on the roadmap in page 4. And those of you who are project managers may find some similarities with the project cycle of defining and initiating, planning, doing, reviewing, or closing. Okay, stage 1 is recognize. This is where the problem is defined and the team gains an in-depth knowledge of the challenge, what they must do and what they must not do. And something that will be helpful in this stage are the challenge requirements identification worksheets that you'll find on pages 15 and 16 in the roadmap. This is an example of 2 examples of the use of that worksheet. This will help the kids understand the main elements of the challenge and what they can do. So page 15 has some examples, and then there's a blank form on page 16. So some additional tools that you can use for this phase are the deliverable requirements planning chart on page 110, the team project goals worksheet on page 113, and then the resources, constraints, and assumptions worksheet. These are project management worksheets that'll be very helpful with the recognize phase. The next stage is the imagine stage. This is where you're going to use most of the thinking tools that we'll be talking about. This is really where the team generates the ideas that they're going to use and focuses on the most promising ideas. So they'll probably be creating a project timeline at this stage, and this is where they'll use generating tools and focusing tools. Generating tools are used to generate ideas. There are some really good rules about the use of generating tools and how to come up with the best ideas. The premise being the more ideas, the better ideas you'll come up with. The 2 that are highlighted in the roadmap are ABC brainstorming and mix and match. And these are great tools for coming up with ideas that for the general storyline, for props, for different elements of the challenge that are creative. From our website, there are additional generating tools that can be found on the resources page that are not in the roadmap. And those are the attribute listing, force fitting, and scamper. And these are all generating tools that can be used for the teams to take what might be considered sort of boring, humdrum ideas and making them more creative. So an example of the use of force fitting is taking 2 unrelated ideas, items, or elements and forcing them to fit together. An example would be the use of a cloud and a cow, and you'd ask your team to put those together and make something creative out of it. Then once you've generated a number of ideas that you think are creative, you can use focusing tools to pare them down to determine which ones you're actually going to use. There are more focusing tools in the roadmap than you'll find generating tools. And they go from very complicated to really fairly simple to use. The benefit of using focusing tools instead of voting on ideas, which is something that a lot of teams resort to, is that if you use focusing tools, they're deliberate, objective ways of evaluating ideas so that emotions and ownership don't come into play quite as much. Every team member then has a say in determining which ideas you're going to use. My favorite tool is SWS, Strengths, Weaknesses, and Special Features. This is a great tool for taking an idea and evaluating why it's a good idea, what makes it good. You might think it's creative, you might think it's colorful, you might think it's something that nobody else will come up with. And then what are the weaknesses? The weaknesses might be that it's going to be difficult to use, you don't have the knowledge, or that the materials might be expensive. And then special features are the idea, what makes those ideas special. When you evaluate weaknesses going through this process, you can also evaluate what processes can be used to overcome those weaknesses, and sometimes that results in special features or creative features. The chooser tool is a very, very simple tool that can be used if you have only a few options and you're trying to narrow it down to one. Then the next stage of the creative process is initiate and collaborate. So we've really finished with most of the thinking tools. At this stage, you're going to be this is the doing stage. You've come up with your ideas, you know what you have to learn to implement them. So this is where you're doing your researching, your building, and actually getting things done. Now, this isn't a process that goes distinctly from one stage to another. At this point in time, you might find out that something's just not going to work. You can't figure it out. It's too expensive. It's going to take too much time. And you have to go back to stage 2 and figure out something else to do. So you might have the additional use of some of the thinking tools at that, if that in fact does happen. What you'll be doing in stage 3 and some tools that you can use are the project management tools, team roles and responsibilities, milestones and tasks sequencing. This is just determining what order you're going to have to do each task. And then resource planning, who's going to be responsible for what and what resources you're going to need. And this again is found in the project management section. So the next stage is the assessment stage. At this point, you're finished with the bulk of your creating, with your doing, implementing, and you're assessing what you have. This is where you're going to be doing most of your rehearsing and trying to smooth over problems that you might find. So you have to assess your progress and rework or reimagine some of your ideas if they're not working. And you'll practice presenting your solution. A good tool at this point is the risk management plan, which is on page 120 in the roadmap. This is a way of evaluating some of the elements in your solution to determine what's the risk if something doesn't work. How are you going to fix it? What's the percentage? What's the chance that something might go wrong? And that's especially important when you're talking about that is more important when you're talking about the technical challenges or technical elements in your solution. Then the last stage is stage 5, evaluate and celebrate. You'll be presenting at the tournament and reflecting on your performance and celebrating the experience. So a good exercise at this point is the group reflection lineup, which is page 121 to 122 in the roadmap. It's just a way to kind of evaluate what the kids thought of their experience in the DI season. And after you've done that, the only thing left to do is have a party, and you don't need a tool for that. Thank you, team managers.